Cannabis Common Sense, the show that tells the truth about marijuana and the politics behind its prohibition.
Hello and welcome to another exciting edition of Cannabis Common Sense. We have another great show for you tonight. We're going to have the remaining portion of the lecture that I gave in Mexico last year. We also have an interview with Dr. Benson of the Oregon Health Sciences University from back in 1999. We have John Trudell's last performance from 2015. We have an excerpt from KATU on legalization back in 2013, and a video from Jim Matthiessen, who recently passed away. He did back in 2009 in honor of Jack Hare, who just passed away then. It's called I Miss You. We miss Jim Matthiessen. But without further ado, here are our infamous dancing cannabis leaves.
I feel the force.
Our first story tonight. We announced last week that 10 months after President Biden's administration requested that the Department of Health and Human Services initiate an administrative process to review and expeditiously see that marijuana is rescheduled under federal law, HHS Secretary Javier Becerra confirmed that the agency has recommended cannabis to be removed from its Schedule I classification with no medical benefit and be moved to Schedule III of the Federal Controlled Substances Act. While some, particularly those involved in the commercial cannabis industry, have lauded the proposed changes as a giant step forward, we know that this is not enough. We know that those corporations' stock jumped with that news. But twice in the past 4 years, Congress passed the MORE Act, the Marijuana Opportunity Reinvestment and Expungement Act, to completely remove cannabis from the schedule of controlled drugs. But the Republicans in the United States Senate have blocked it. There are several reasons that we need to completely deschedule cannabis. First, reclassifying cannabis to a lower schedule within the Controlled Substances Act continues to misrepresent the plant's safety relative to other controlled substances such as anabolic steroids and ketamine, which are both Schedule III, benzodiazepines, which are Schedule IV, and even alcohol, which is unscheduled. Second, moving cannabis to Schedule III is out of step with the public and cultural consensus. Americans don't want cannabis treated like heroin, like it is now. Still, they don't want it treated like a Schedule III substance, like steroids, which is only legal to possess with a physician's prescription. Third, and most importantly, this proposed change does little to address the widening divide between state legal marijuana laws and federal law. Every state law that's currently in conflict with federal law today will remain in conflict with federal law going forward, or if the administration reclassifies cannabis as Schedule III. That is why, historically, we call for descheduling cannabis, removing it from the Controlled Substances Act altogether, thereby providing state governments, rather than the federal government, the ability to regulate marijuana as they see fit without violating federal law. We have several medical articles. First, from Greece. Patients diagnosed with neurological disorders like epilepsy and Parkinson's disease experience improvements in their symptoms following medical cannabis treatment, according to data published in the journal Advances in Experimental Medicine and Biology. A team of Greek scientists assessed cannabis use in a cohort of 100 patients. The patient's quality of life was assessed via the use of a 36-item health survey. The researchers reported, quote, the majority of our patients who receive medical cannabis to treat their neurological disorders, 58% reported decreases in their symptoms, including better energy and vitality, an improvement in sleeping and appetite after receiving medical cannabis. Participants who reported a longer period of receiving medical cannabis reported statistically significantly more energy and vitality, but also better mental and general health status, end quote. Data published earlier this year similarly reported that the use of plant-derived cannabis oils containing THC and CBD is safe and effective for older patients suffering from certain treatment-resistant neurological diseases, including Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis, and peripheral neuropathy. This study, Quality of Life in Patients Receiving Medical Cannabis, appears in this month's edition of Advances in Experimental Medicine and Biology. Out of New York City, Patients diagnosed with cancer frequently turn to cannabis for symptom management, according to an article in the Journal of Supportive Care in Cancer. Researchers affiliated with Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in New York City surveyed 1,258 cancer patients. 31% of the respondents said they used cannabis products following their diagnosis. All respondents resided in states where medical use of cannabis for cancer is legal. The respondents were most likely to report consuming cannabis products to improve sleep, reduce pain, relieve stress, and depression. Those who use cannabis for palliative care overwhelmingly reported improvements in their symptoms. 1 in 4 consumers discussed their cannabis use with their healthcare providers, a result that's consistent with other studies finding that most patients are reluctant to speak with their doctors about cannabis-specific health issues. The author of this study concluded, quote, "Our study found that cannabis use among cancer patients is common across socio-demographic and clinical populations, with cannabis often obtained without the oncologist's involvement. Oncologists and other members of the oncology team are uniquely positioned to provide education about the benefits of cannabis use specifically for cancer patients, which is especially important in the context of often conflicting evidence. Interventions to improve cannabis education and communication need not target oncologists who treat specific cancers, as cannabis use appears consistent across multiple patient characteristics," end quote. According to survey data compiled earlier this year by researchers at the University of Michigan, a majority of physicians say they lack the skills to adequately counsel patients on the use of medical cannabis. This study, Cannabis Use Among Recently Treated Cancer Patients, appears in this month's edition of Supported Care in Cancer. Our next story tonight and last story is from Brazil. Autistic patients who use plant-derived cannabis extracts perceive benefits in their symptoms and reduce their use of prescription medications, according to data published in the journal Frontiers in Psychiatry. A team of Brazilian researchers assessed the use of individually tailored doses of cannabis extracts in subjects with autism spectrum disorder. Most patients, 80%, consume cannabis extracts for at least 6 months. The patients used extracts dominant in either CBD or THC. All extracts were administered via orally with drops. Cannabis treatment was associated with perceived symptom improvement as well as reductions in patients' use of neuropsychiatric medications. Reported side effects from cannabis treatment were mostly mild and temporary. The investigators reported patients and their families' quality of life improved in 19 out of 20 cases. They concluded, quote, "Our study expands the scientific data demonstrating that clinical use of cannabis extract is a safe intervention with promising and valuable effects over many core and comorbid aspects of autism that are not achieved by conventional medications. Based on our findings, we propose guidelines for individually tailored dosage regimens that may be adapted to locally available qualified treatment plans." Numerous other studies have also identified improvements in autism patients who consume either plant-derived extracts or cannabis flower. Survey data published in 2021 by the publication Autism Parenting Magazine reported that 22% of U.S. caregivers or parents have provided CBD to an autistic child. This study, individually tailored dosage regimen of full-spectrum cannabis extracts for autistic core and comorbid symptoms, a real-life report on multi-symptomatic benefits, appears in this month's edition of Frontiers in Psychiatry. That is the end of our Hemp News segment tonight. Now we have a few different things. We have, first off, the remaining 20 minutes of my presentation in Mexico last year about the history of cannabis. 7 minutes of Dr. John Benson from the Oregon Health University, the former dean of the university back in 1999. John Trudell's last performance at Hempstalk in 2015, a video from KATU in 2013, and a song with Jim Matthiessen. So stay tuned and help us restore hemp. Good night. Louis Armstrong was one of the most famous jazz musicians. He was famous around the world. He always used cannabis and advocated for cannabis legalization. He said that from the time they made it illegal. He got an opportunity to meet with many different presidents. He would tell them, make marijuana legal. Of course, they ignored it. This is from the early 1960s. This is a very famous American poet, Allen Ginsberg. He started a group called LEMAR, and LEMAR, or Legalization of Marijuana, advocated for the legalization of marijuana. And so this is from a protest that Allen Ginsberg organized in New York City back in the late 50s. But he continued to work with this group LEMAR. and Limar on the West Coast, they started a company called Amorphia that made cannabis growing papers. And so this is an advertisement for Amorphia, and they took the profit from Amorphia selling cannabis rolling papers, and they used that money to put an initiative petition on the ballot in the state of California in 1972. That was the first time that marijuana legalization was voted on in the United States in 1972, and it was Amorphia's profits that helped finance that, to put that on the ballot. And it was voted on in 1972, and it was voted down with just 32% of the vote. That was the first marijuana vote in the United States. And in 1973, Oregon became the first state to decriminalize cannabis, to make it where you wouldn't go to jail, just paid a fine. And so California did that in 1974. By the end of the 70s, 10 states had decriminalized marijuana. This is a poster from a protest in Washington, D.C., in front of the White House. It's called the White House Smoke-In. That takes place on July 4th. It's been going on for over 50 years now. Started in 1972 and they started calling it the Smoke-In in 1976. And this is a poster from the 1978 White House Smoke-In. I actually went to this protest just a week after my 18th birthday. And so this was a poster that it was actually covered in the news on television about the Smoke-In, and I decided I want to go. I didn't see this poster beforehand, but this is a poster from that event in 1978. This is a photo from November 1st of 1985. And I am standing there half cut off to the right, and I've got my hand on the petitions. We are inside the Oregon State Capitol, and we are turning in petitions for the second vote in the history of the United States on marijuana legalization. The fellow in the background, between the woman and the man in the foreground, you can see his face and his glasses and his beard. That's Jack Herer, who wrote The Emperor Wears No Clothes, The History of Hemp and Cannabis. He actually came into my house for about 3 months to put together the very first edition of The Emperor Wears No Clothes. And I did research and found that China had the world's largest hemp crop. And that's when I decided to start studying Chinese. But that's Jack Herer, some other people, Anthony Taylor, Lindsey Bradshaw, at the office of the Secretary of State, turning in petitions to qualify for the second marijuana vote that happened a year later. It's actually still the earliest initiative to qualify in Oregon history. That's another story. But we made a vote in November of 1986, and we lost overwhelmingly. The whole President Reagan administration came down on us. The vice president at the time was George H.W. Bush. He later became the president after Reagan, and his son became president later, George W. Bush. But George H.W. Bush toured Oregon for 2 weeks in January of 1986, organizing against our vote in November of 1986. And in the end, we just got 27% of the vote, less than they got in California a dozen years earlier. But we came together and continued to work on legalization. And I continued to work on putting marijuana legalization on the ballot. This is Jack Herer in front of a store where it's a Polaroid photo of us looking at Polaroid photos. It's Jack Herer, John Sajo, and me there in the leather jacket. This is my student ID from 1988, and it is from Zhengzhou University in central China, in Henan, the seat of Chinese culture. And I studied Chinese so I could import hemp paper and hemp fabric. And this is me approximately 1991 in my hemp paper company, and some photos that were made. I sold hemp paper under my company Tree Free Eco Paper starting in 1988 until 1997. And I had to, paper is a capital intensive industry, so I had to give that up. I had 3 little children at the time, but I had started a cable TV show before I entered this company called Cannabis Common Sense. And I still do that TV show today. And it's on cable channel 11 in Portland, Oregon, and on other channels in Oregon and Washington State. And it's also on the internet. And so these are some frames from our TV show. There's our TV studio. And we still are making Cannabis Common Sense. We've done more than 1,140 episodes to date. And we'll make another show almost every Friday night. And so this is in our cable TV studio. If you want to watch it, we have it on Facebook at facebook.com/RestoreHemp. That has a following of over 600,000 likes. And it's also available on YouTube at youtube.com/Cannabis Common Sense. This is on the set of that show. We have Madeline Martinez and Keith Strop. Keith Strop started the biggest marijuana legalization group in the world, NORML, the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. So it's good to have Keith Strop on our show. You see, I also had antique medical marijuana containers and other hemp products there on our desk, and I would go through many, many shows and talk about the antique hemp medicines and hemp products. We burned a little hemp flame with hemp fuel, hemp oil, and a hemp wick, and that we burned as the hemp flame of freedom. And we still do that when we're in the studio. Here I am with Jorge Cervantes. Jorge is actually from Oregon too. I began working with him in 1985. I'm still good friends with him. There are pictures that from my garden in most of his books, including Marijuana Horticulture and his Cannabis Encyclopedia. I'm actually included in Jorge's Cannabis Encyclopedia. If you look at one, you can see it on page 100. This is my office for THCF Medical Clinic. This is our head office in Portland, Oregon. And we also had offices, as I said earlier, across the country. This is our Seattle office. This is our Denver, Colorado office. So we started in Oregon in 1998, 1999 actually, and then we opened in Washington in 2001, Hawaii in 2002, Colorado in 2003. Altogether, as I said earlier, we opened in 10 states, saw patients in 60 cities, and have helped over 270,000 Americans get their permits to possess, use, and grow medical marijuana. But I still do this today as well. It's a smaller business. There's another background story I won't go into, but this is our Denver office. This is the stage of the Seattle Hemp Fest. The Seattle Hemp Fest is the largest marijuana legalization protest in America. It hasn't happened with the pandemic, but we're trying to get it going back again. But we would have 200 to 250,000 people a year come to the Seattle waterfront to protest marijuana prohibition. That's one of the reasons Washington and Colorado were among the first states to legalize marijuana. In 2012, when Washington and Colorado voted on marijuana legalization, we did that in Oregon too. And this is me on the set of a local television station, KATU Channel 2, an ABC affiliate, being interviewed about marijuana legalization. And here is a banner from 2012. It shows that Colorado, Oregon, and Washington voted to legalize marijuana then in 2012. Amendment 64 in Colorado was backed by the Marijuana Policy Project, and they raised over $3.5 million from Peter Lewis, the owner of a big insurance company, and others for that successful campaign in Colorado, where they got 54% of the vote to legalize marijuana in 2012. In Washington, with I-502, it had even larger backing from the Drug Policy Alliance and the billionaire financier George Soros that backs the Drug Policy Alliance. And they put over $6 million into legalization in Washington state. I financed, through my medical clinics, the vote in Oregon on Measure 80. And I put almost all the money I put into it before to qualify for the ballot. Actually, after we qualified for the ballot,
using about $800,000. We actually only had another $100,000 for the campaign. And we lost in 2012 with a vote of 47% in favor and 53% against. So it was the very same year in 2012 that Colorado and Washington became the first states. We almost became the first state, but we became the wave of second states. We went back, gathered enough signatures. This is a billboard on a major highway, Interstate 5 in Oregon, saying prohibition is the problem and hemp is the answer. So that banner was up there for about 3 years. And in 2014, we voted again for legalization and we won, and marijuana became legal in Oregon. There were these contests about cannabis, just as there are cannabis cups today. And I won a number of awards for growing cannabis as a master grower, a friend of Jorge Cervantes and Ed Rosenthal. So these are some of the trophies and ribbons I won at the Oregon Medical Cannabis Awards and the Southern Oregon Cannabis Cup there. I grew for many different patients. Among them is famous country music singer Willie Nelson. Willie Nelson is well known in America as a cannabis proponent. In America, he's the most famous cannabis smoker in America. And he's still out there touring at the age of 88. This is his house on the island of Maui in Hawaii. And he posed for this picture with me. This is on his bus. I think this is down in Riverside, California. This is a poster, actually a sticker that Greenpeace made using my hemp paper, approximately 1995. You can see there in small print under Take It Back, it says printed on tree-free eco paper with 50% hemp and 50% straw paper. I think hemp seeds are very, very important. We need hemp seed to fill all of our culture's needs and to stop greed. Hemp seed meal is the most nutritious food in terms of protein. It has the perfect balance of amino acids for human health. Though soy produces more protein ounce for ounce, hemp produces more protein than soy by a factor of 5 to 1. And soy protein is not as digestible as hemp protein. Hemp proteins, essential fatty acids, the omega-3, 6, and 9, perfectly match humans' nutritional needs. And the 8 amino acids in hemp seed are in the perfect balance for humans' nutritional needs. Again, we've co-evolved with hemp for over 25,000 years, and we've grown it to meet our needs. And so we're in this symbiotic relationship with hemp where we've changed hemp and hemp has changed humanity. This is a package of body care products produced by The Body Shop back in the 1990s. The owner of The Body Shop, Anita Roderick, made a documentary about my friend Jack Herer called The Emperor of Hemp, and she used hemp products and pioneered hemp body products around the world. Unfortunately, she passed away from cancer about 10 years ago. Here's another depiction of high THC hemp. We have this irrational fear of THC. We talk about limiting the THC, but while high doses of THC can be very psychoactive, they've never killed anyone. And people rebound from that in just a few days. For most people, for 990 people out of 1,000, cannabis is safe and healthy. A few people, like 1 out of 1,000, have a schizophrenia that is set off by ingesting cannabis. But it's a lot safer than alcohol, which about 15 to 20% of the people have major problems with. High THC hemp produces 3 times more seed per acre than low THC hemp. It also produces about twice as much fiber. So as long as we're only cultivating low THC hemp with less than 1% THC, we will never see cannabis reach its full potential. We need to stop this irrational fear of THC. High THC produces much more seed oil, much more seed protein, much more fiber. And so, when mammals begin to breastfeed their young, a substance called colostrum starts to flow before lactation, which is producing milk and the nutrition. And this colostrum is mainly endogenous THC. The body produces this endogenous THC. Scientist in Israel named Raphael Mekulam named it anandamide back in the 1990s, and he discovered the whole endogenous endocannabinoid system in our body. That's led to enormous breakthroughs in neuroscience. But high THC hemp is much more productive than low THC hemp. And you can see we can get a lot of THC from seed production. But hemp seed oil is a fuel and very, very healthy. And we need to start using hemp seed oil. If you mix it with 15% ethanol or alcohol, it burns hotter and cleaner. But pure hemp seed oil can be poured into any diesel engine. You can turn the key and run your diesel engine on pure hemp seed oil. And we need to get back to that. We need to start making hemp fuel again, which won't add to the carbon dioxide on the planet. If we were using hemp oil, we would not see the huge growth in global warming. Hemp can solve many of our problems, from feeding the hungry with hemp seed, fueling our energy in our cars with hemp seed oil, clothing our people, and building materials made from hemp fiber, papers, all of that can be made from hemp. And so we have co-evolved with hemp for over 25,000 years. And hemp has changed us, and we have changed hemp. And we need that evolution to continue to try to save what's left of our biosphere and pass that on to our descendants. Again, hemp is earth medicine, and I urge you to restore hemp. And this is our organization, the Campaign for the Restoration and Regulation of Hemp. And if you need to reach me, you can see our TV show at facebook.com/restorehemp. And you can reach me, D. Paul Stanford, at Gmail, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. It's all under D. Paul Stanford. So thank you for watching my presentation. I hope I taught you a thing or two. Feel free to reach out to me and ask some questions if you have them. And restore hemp. Good day.
The Israeli scientist, I think his name's Raphael
Mekulam.
He's the one who discovered THC about 25 years ago, and then discovered the receptor sites, or at least worked on the team of.
Worked on those, and has also been involved in some of the endogenous cannabinoids, the natural substances we all have in our brains and bodies, as well. Still very active.
Right.
Excuse me, are those comparable to endorphins, or
Well, they're a different group of chemicals, also endogenous though, that use different receptors. There are different receptors for the opioids, morphine and codeine, those two substances. So the endorphins are among these agents that help energize the neurons to put out transmitters in various centers of the brain. And cannabinoids, or the components of the marijuana leaf, are yet another system, pharmacological system.
So that endogenous system, I think they call it the endorphin-like substance. It's anandamides. Is that the proper?
Anandamide is the
Anandamides.
one that is best developed. It also uses the so-called CB1 receptor, cannabinoid 1 receptor, and such as THC does. And then there's another one that's 2AG, arachidonyl glycerol, which is another of these endogenous cannabinoid-like substances.
Have they identified the primary action of this receptor system? Is it?
There are many actions, actually. The receptors have been identified and cloned, actually, and they can be sited or located in various parts of the brain that have to do with pain perception, with movement control, with control of vomiting, with warm and pleasant feelings, with sedation, and so forth. So they're very common throughout the brain.
So that there is a definite, what shall we say, therapeutic action of these substances. Would that be?
Well,
I mean,
I wouldn't say
the actions that you mentioned seem to me to be therapeutic in nature, or could be therapeutic.
Well, they might be exploited for therapeutic uses, that's correct, because there are these systems in place. And that's the reason, I'm sure, that people have found some utility for the use of these cannabinoid substances.
Before the president of the Institute of Medicine asked you to be a co-investigator, can you tell us about the process that led up to the Institute of Medicine conducting this inquiry?
Yes, the White House Office of National Drug Control Policy, which is directed by Barry McCaffrey, asked the Institute to consider such a study and was willing to fund it. About the same time, a major foundation also thought this would be worthy of study, but the Institute thought it better, and so did apparently General McCaffrey, if only the one sponsor were responsible. And so a proposal was made to his office by the Institute staff, which led to a statement of task, so-called, and then the funding of the study.
What was the mandate from the Office of National Drug Control Policy? Didn't they exclude? They just wanted the medical report, nothing to do with science or social policy.
The science, yes. They wanted the scientific basis for any benefits or harms that might come from the medical use of marijuana or its component substances. And we were not restricted, but we were not picked either to address issues of social, legislative, regulatory, etc. kinds of considerations. I think it would have been a very different statement of task and a very different group. It would not have included me.
Were you involved at all? I know that the Institute of Medicine produced a report 15 years before regarding marijuana, not specifically as medicine.
There
you must
was
have reviewed that.
Oh, absolutely. I was not. That was in 1982. And it was frustrated by the lack of clear science, rigorous experimentation, and called repeatedly for research in various fields. In the meantime, there's been a explosion of knowledge in the basic science field. All of these anandamide and receptors and neurotransmitters and sighting of these things in various control areas in the brain have been elaborated. So we were at a distinct advantage over the people who did that study. And we hope we carried things a bit further because of that new science.
Could you address that explosion in science and discovery of the receptor system a bit for our audience?
Well, it really was the identification of the receptors themselves, cloning them, sighting them wherever they were found, both in the brain and peripherally. The CB2, the cannabinoid 2 receptor, is primarily in the immune system and more peripheral nervous system, and CB1 is primarily in the brain. These endogenous cannabinoid-like substances that I've mentioned were elaborated, and a good deal of just straight pharmacology done on them, so that we had the advantage of, for example, showing the effects in animals on pain, and showing the effects on control of motion, things of that nature, from these basic science advances. They were really quite remarkable and pretty exciting to an internist clinician like myself. Had no idea they had existed.
Because we're in a situation, we're in a dimensional reality now where pretty much you got to pretty much improvise as we go along, you know. And to really be able to effectively improvise as we go along, we need to be able to do it with respecting the clarity, respecting our intelligence, you know. We need to be able to do it with clarity, because they're fucking with our minds. They're mind fucking us so that we can't see. We don't know anymore. So everybody's just afraid. That's it. That's reality. Reality is fear. You know, and everybody's being mind fucked through that fear. So no, you know, and so everybody's going around reactionary behavior patterns. They really are the same thing that's going on, but they've convinced themselves they're doing something different. Am I making sense? Yeah. All right. See, so if there's going to be any real change, right? We got to understand to respect our intelligence. See, and we need. It's very important. It's very, very important that we learn how to like ourselves. This is the most important thing of all. Because see, if you don't like yourself, then what the fuck good you going to do for the rest of the world when it really comes down? Because I don't like myself. No offense meant. But see, that's what I mean. We need to think, because there's too much muddled going on here that's getting in the way of us having the lives that we are entitled to. And especially with what's coming. See, not my generation, I'm of the generation, we're booking, we're going, you know. We get to go on and do the rest of our stuff. But with what's coming here, it's very important that we need to understand, to like ourselves, to respect our intelligence. Because we can talk spirituality all we want. We can talk good guy stuff all we want. But if we don't like ourselves, what does it mean? I mean, seriously. Seriously. And now, back to the part about liking ourselves. See, and to me, don't like ourselves. See, if we're full of fear, doubt, and insecurity, and we just think we're fucked up, you know, then that means we don't like ourselves. But what my point being, if you look at reality with clarity, somebody put that in our mind. See, somebody said it to us. Somebody told it to us. We didn't think that up ourselves. Am I making sense? All right? See, so, and it's very important for us to understand that. Somebody that wanted to control us and feed off of us put this fear. See, and the fear starts with, we don't like ourselves because we don't think we're good. However they put it in there, whatever version of that virus we carry. But our intelligence is the antibiotic. Anyway, whatever goes on, keep a clear mind. You know, because I mean, power is very power. Power comes from us and how we use a clear mind. Yeah, because I don't know, sometimes I get confused, because I am multidimensional sometimes, and I'm crazy, you know, and I don't trust any of you normal fuckers at all. No offense, but because you don't understand what power is. See? Power is in your heartbeat. All right, power is in your heartbeat. Power is in your heartbeat. It sends electrical energy, and your brain transmits electrical energy through what is called thought. That's power. All right? That's power. We are our own power. All right? This is, all the rest of it's whatever it is. All right? But power comes from us. Money is about authority, not power. Politics is about authority. Military is about authority. See, all these religion is all about authority. All right, but we believe. See, we don't think anyway. We've been programmed to believe that these things represent power, but in reality, they represent forms of authority. Power is an entirely different thing. See, but in the land of deceit, sleight of mind, and delusion, we get confused. Okay.
Welcome to this special edition of Your Voice, Your Vote. Marijuana activists want you to vote on whether to legalize the drug, and they want you to do it sooner rather than later. They plan to have an initiative on the November ballot in 2014. Currently, there are several bills in the state legislature dealing with marijuana. However, the most pertinent is the one that would legalize, regulate, and tax marijuana. The bill probably won't make it out of committee. So the pro-marijuana folks say if the legislature doesn't act, they will. My guest today is Paul Stanford, who was the sponsor of last year's marijuana measure that failed. And you just began the legal process of getting a measure on the ballot for next year. Why so imperative to get it on the ballot so soon, Paul?
Well, we realize that the summer's coming very quickly, and that's the best season to petition. It's a lot easier to gather signatures the year prior to the initiative deadline, which is next July. So it's better and cheaper for us to do it this year. And we want to urge the legislature to pass House Bill 3371. And if they do, or if they refer it to the people for a vote, as some legislators favor, then we don't have to put the initiative on the ballot. We'll support what the Oregon legislature's done. And in fact, our newspaper, the Oregonian, has endorsed and said that's what the legislature should do.
Do you think you'll have everything done, everything ready to go to have it on the ballot in November?
Yes, yeah, I do. I think if the legislature doesn't act and put this on the ballot, then we're going to put two initiatives on the ballot, one constitutional amendment and one statutory measure to tax and regulate marijuana to adults.
Okay, we'll talk a little bit about that as well coming up. Some state lawmakers say this is not something we should rush into. Representative Andy Olson is opposed to House Bill 3371. That's the bill we mentioned earlier, and he's against an initiative petition. He thinks lawmakers really need to study this issue first. Listen to this.
I don't believe right now Oregon's ready to move forward with the policy discussion as it applies toward what 3371 represents. And that bill in itself creates the issue of dispensaries and with the attempt of trying to control more. I would not move forward with anything right now during this session, especially an initiative petition toward this. I would let the legislature have a work group together from this when the session's over here, and then move forward with something that would work toward protecting people who need to have marijuana along the medical marijuana side, but also at the same time deal with those who are abusing it right now.
He's saying give the legislature more time. And don't you think, Paul, that maybe a bill from the legislature would have more clout with the voters than a citizens'
Well, it certainly
initiative?
would, and that's why we support a referral to the people by the legislature. And if they don't do it this July, then there's a short session next February, and we're hopeful that they'll do it then. If they do, then we don't need to go forward and put this on the ballot. But we want to be prepared if they don't, because we think the people are ready to vote on this. We just did a poll that showed that 63% of Oregonian voters, likely voters, are supporting taxing and regulating marijuana. The vote in Washington last November, 6 months ago, has changed the whole dynamic. Now, half the state is within an hour's drive of the Washington border, and we can legally cross the river here in Portland and be able to legally possess marijuana, and soon we'll be able to legally buy it. I don't think we should be sending our tax dollars into Washington's coffers. I think we have a lot of public programs here in Oregon and jobs in Oregon that we can keep here.
You touched upon those two initiatives. Can you kind of explain those in depth a little bit?
Sure. One of them is a constitutional amendment to allow the right for adults to possess, use, and grow marijuana to be added to the state constitution. It also allows the state to regulate it. The other one is a revision of last year's Measure 80, which would tax and regulate the sale of marijuana to adults over 21.
What did you learn from the failure of Measure 80?
We learned to make certain that the composition of the newly appointed Cannabis Commission is nonpartisan and not slanted toward anyone in the nascent marijuana industry. So we have all the members of the newly created Oregon Cannabis Commission appointed by the governor. So it won't be some people from the industry. That was a mistake in our last drive. We also have put a limit on the amount people can possess and grow for personal use without a license to match what the Oregon medical marijuana program allows medical patients to have today.
Have you had any discussions with the governor about this at all, about his role in this Cannabis Commission?
You know, I have not directly had any conversations with the governor.
Anybody else you know that's talked to him and how he feels about this?
I'm not sure how he feels about it. You know, the governor doesn't have to sign a referral to the people. If the legislature passes a referral to the people, it goes directly there. You know, back in 1997, the Oregon legislature moved to criminalize the simple possession of marijuana. Oregon was the first state to decriminalize that in '73, and the governor signed that recriminalization bill into law. And we had to do a referendum to stop that from going into effect. And in fact, we won every county in the state and got 67% of the vote to stop the recriminalization of possession of less than an ounce of marijuana. So his history on marijuana is sketchy. You know, there's a lot of talk about the governor being a closet smoker back in the 70s and 80s. I've met a number of people who claim they have imbibed with Governor Kitzhaber.
No, we certainly have no proof of that, but it'd be interesting to get his point of view on what his role in this cannabis commission that you talk about.
Yeah.
I want to ask you something else. You know, of course it passed in Washington and Colorado. It's now legal. Marijuana is in those states. What did you learn from those elections?
The laws up there were drafted and had a lot of financial backing in advance, and we've learned to bring in some of these outside groups that didn't support us in the last election, and they're behind us this time. In fact, they're partially funded the poll that we just did that showed 63% of Oregon likely
Did you
voters.
commission that poll? Who did? You guys did?
Yeah, we did, along with the Drug Policy Alliance.
Okay, there's obvious concern from legislators and the public, as you well know, about what the federal government will eventually do to Washington and Colorado, states that legalized marijuana in the last election. In fact, we have a question from Representative Wally Hicks on that particular issue. Listen to this.
How the federal government is going to approach Oregon's law and Oregon's posture if his ballot measures do get passed. I think any marijuana policy, legislation, or ballot measure needs to first consider the federal government's posture towards marijuana and be crafted around that. The federal government is very difficult to predict right now in terms of how they're going to go with marijuana.
You know, they're nervous about that in Colorado and Washington as well. When
Certainly.
will the Fed step in? If they step in, I think they probably will at some point. Aren't you concerned about that at all?
Well, certainly. You know, our initiative was specifically drafted to deal with the federal supremacy issue. The laws in Washington and Colorado were not. The federal government hasn't done anything in the 6 months since that election, though. In fact, several former heads of the Drug Enforcement Administration said 3 months ago if they didn't move within a month, it would be too late. Well, it's been 6 months since the election, and the state governments in Washington and Colorado have done a lot to move forward in regulating and taxing the sale of marijuana. It's already legal for over 5 months for people to possess it, and in Colorado they can legally grow their own now.
You think every day, every week that goes by, the folks in Washington, Colorado go, we may just make this?
Well, I think so. I also think that you know, when the Democratic Party gets behind marijuana legalization, just as FDR built a huge coalition when he ended alcohol prohibition, the Democratic Party has the opportunity to build another huge coalition when they get behind marijuana legalization. I think that President Obama knows that he might have lost Colorado if he'd gone against the initiative there, and he knows that his base supporters are in favor of marijuana legalization. So I'm very hopeful that the government will allow these states to act as, you know, the proverbial laboratories of democracy.
We asked K2 Facebook followers their thoughts on whether to legalize marijuana. This comment comes from Marianne Lane. Marijuana, she says, should be legalized, taxed, and hemp should be grown as a crop. Lots of new revenue and take the money out of the drug dealers' hands. Do you honestly think, though, Paul, the black market won't exist if marijuana is legal? Won't people still try and find the cheapest source here?
Well, you know, you don't see many people growing their own tobacco, and though some people make their own beer, we still have a multi-billion-dollar industry doing that. But you know, this writer is right. Hemp is going to dwarf the drug market. Hemp for fuel, fiber, and food is going to be a multiple of what the marijuana market is, and it will, once we legalize it, we'll put Oregon on the cutting edge of some exciting new environmentally beneficial development.
A lot of people feel it's inevitable that Oregonians will, in fact, agree to legalize, vote to legalize marijuana. Is that really good for the state? Is that what we need right now?
I think so. I think.
Tell me why.
Because, you know, I think marijuana is a the issue upon which the future of freedom really hinges. That if we don't allow people to use this relatively harmless substance, the future of freedom could be dire. We need to give people the right to think the thoughts and feel the way they want to. And I think that marijuana legalization will create an economic boom here in this state, and we'll see environmentally sustainable changes with hemp fuel, fiber, and food.
But
and that'll be beneficial not just for the people of Oregon, but for the whole world.
You have folks who say, okay, let's legalize marijuana. What's next? Is crack next? What heroin after that? I mean, a lot of folks consider this a gateway drug, marijuana, and are concerned about that.
Well, you know, it's a gateway to the black market. So when you take marijuana out of the black market, that gateway will close, and there will be a lot less people looking for those other drugs. I really believe that.
A major concern about marijuana is the impairment issue. Salem resident Christy Wood would like you to answer this question. Listen to this one.
I guess we need to figure out how, like drunk driving laws, you know, how we deal with folks that are under the influence of the marijuana.
That's certainly a concern up in Washington right now.
Certainly.
How do you test for driving under the influence of marijuana?
There are saliva tests, mouth tests that can tell whether you've inhaled cannabis recently, and certainly a blood test is the best way to tell the presence of active marijuana in your system.
Paul, is that what we need, though? Do we need all these people out there on the roads now that have been smoking
We already
pot?
have it. It's already there, and we need to regulate it and take it out of the hands of the kids and substance abusers and the black market and put it in the hands of the state where it's regulated and produces a public benefit, and it can be truthfully researched, and we can educate our youth about the truth about marijuana instead of the myths about it.
So you're saying it's already happening anyway? Let's regulate this stuff.
That's right. Prohibition obviously hasn't worked, and we need to regulate it and tax it. And by allowing hemp to return to a place it is previously held in our economy, we'll be creating an untold multitude of jobs.
What kind of, do you think this sends a good message to the kids, though? That's the big question. Here's Representative Andy Olson again with a question pertaining to that.
How is he going to address the ability to prevent youth from accessing this right now, when Oregon's the leading state in the nation right now for 8th graders smoking cigarette tobacco? It's not much more of a step for that also being accessed for marijuana, even though we say it's prohibited. How are you going to stop that?
There you go. And you say?
We will create new penalties that treat people who sell marijuana to youth as criminals, as felons. People who provide it to youth will be punishable by jail term, and there'll be a fine for children, people under the age of 21, possessing or attempting to obtain cannabis, so $250 under our regulatory model.
One of the concerns I hear from parents is, I've been teaching my child since they were born that drugs are not good. Stay away from drugs, don't smoke pot. And all of a sudden I've got to tell them why it's okay.
Well, the same thing's been true with alcohol and tobacco. And those other drugs are out there. In fact, kids have easier access to marijuana than they do with alcohol. They all will tell you that, because it's regulated and taxed, and they have to show an ID for that. So currently, the kids are selling it in the high school. In fact, that's how I first tried it. So it's not out of the schools until we regulate it out of the schools.
Well, we will be following this very, very closely, as I know you will too, Paul. Always good to see you, sir. And you're confident at this point it will be?
I'm very confident that we're going to put this on the ballot for a vote. We're hopeful that the legislature will do it either in this session or in the special session next year. But if they don't, we're ready to put 2 initiatives on the ballot.
And you think they'll pass?
We think so. Our polls are showing that 83% of Oregonians think marijuana legalization is inevitable, and 64% of Oregonians are in favor of taxing and regulating marijuana now.
Well, we shall see what happens. Paul, thanks for being with us.
Thank you
very much. We switch topics and we come.
Now this song, you know, I'm kind of on a memorial thing tonight. I think it's important to do it right now. This song's for Jack. You know, good buddy. And we love him dearly. And this song's for you, Jack. I remember the time you laid it on the line. It was such a fine time. Yeah, Jack. I miss you. Lord knows I miss you. I miss you. Oh, how I miss you. I remember the other day, the day you went away. Wasn't nothing we could pray. It just had to be that way. So go on, Jack. I miss you. Lord knows I miss you. I miss you. Oh, now I miss you. Thank you. God bless Jack Hare.